Chapter 1. The Prophecy of Blood and Steel. The House of Wisdom stank of rust, alchemical residue, and embalmed secrets. Hidden within the Iron Sultanate's fortified heart, it rose like a brass spire lanced through the ashen skies, an ancient cathedral twisted into a forged temple of flame, smoke, and knowledge not meant for man. Its domes were blackened by centuries of soot, its stained glass eyes glowed with heretical geometries. The sound of dripping condensation, hissing pipes, and murmuring machinery echoed through its walls like distant screams trapped in the marrow of the building. Alchemist-Mistress Zafira moved like a wraith between stacks of forgotten tomes, her heavy robes dragging soot and cinder across the floor. Her breath steamed behind the stitched bronze mask that filtered the fumes of burnt metal and preserved flesh. The light from her lantern danced across etched copper walls and sigil-covered floors. She had studied here for 30 years, bled for knowledge, fed corpses to the catalytic forges, scribed heresy into stone, but tonight, something beneath the blood-rusted catacombs called to her. Her gloved fingers brushed against a cracked obsidian sigil etched into the wall behind a collapsed bookcase. The alchemical runes buzzed faintly beneath her touch, vibrating like a dormant heart. Most would not have noticed it. Most were not Zafira. She retrieved a bone scalpel from her satchel and cut a vertical slit across her palm, letting blood drip into the sigil. The wall groaned like a beast in pain, and with a hiss of escaping steam, it receded, revealing a hidden alcove. Inside, wrapped in chains of tarnished silver and strips of human skin marked with inked prayers, lay a scroll cylinder forged from darkened glass and fused teeth. Zafira hesitated. This was no mere apocrypha. This was something buried on purpose, not to protect it, but to protect from it. She unsealed the container. The scroll was fragile, older than the wall itself, inscribed in a language that hadn't been spoken aloud since the last Maw War. Her mechanical eye adjusted its lens, decoding the glyphs as she whispered each line into the stagnant air. When the moon bleeds into the chalice of rust, and the trench-born chant the name of the hollow flame, the iron wall shall scream, the devourer will rise, and she who swallows light shall feast upon the sins of man. Zafira staggered backward. The Maw Beast. She had heard the name only once, muttered by a dying cardinal whose veins had turned to thorns and mouth to soot. A myth, a blasphemy, a prophecy buried not by time, but by decree. She clutched the scroll close, wrapped it once more in the stitched skin strips, and sealed the passage behind her. There would be no time to alert the clerics, no time for doctrine or debate. The iron wall had stood for 1,000 years, but prophecies carved in forgotten flesh had a tendency to be fulfilled. She needed answers, not from books, but from the whispering dark beneath the war foundry. Beneath the sacred heat of the foundry, where iron giants were birthed from the wombs of slag furnaces and screaming gears, lay the tomb of oracles, sealed to the unworthy, forgotten by the faithful. Zafira descended spiraling stairs into the bleeding heat, where molten rivers coursed through rusted veins, and the air throbbed with the rhythm of dying gods. Chains of rust and bone hung from the ceiling like vines in a jungle of despair. The hallway narrowed, illuminated only by the flicker of sacrificial candles that burned fat and bone. She reached the threshold of the Vault of Tongues and removed her mask. The air scalded her lungs. She knelt. "Oracle of eyes that weep iron," she whispered, "hear the call of your faithful daughter." From the shadows, something moved, dragging its limbs across broken glass and teeth-strewn stone. The blind oracle emerged, a woman no longer human. Her sockets had been sewn shut with copper thread. Her mouth had been split to her ears, revealing a tongue made of hammered gold. Her ribs were open, exposing a writhing nest of script maggots that devoured and rewrote prophecies upon her exposed bone. "I see the scream within your silence," the oracle rasped, her voice an amalgam of child, crone, and rusted machine. Zafira bowed lower. "The scroll speaks of the Maw Beast. The iron wall will not hold." The oracle's pronouncement fell like a guillotine. There is a cabal. Heretics. They seek to open a hellmaw beyond the northern breach. Zafira's blood chilled. How long? The oracle swayed. Her split mouth twisted into something that might have once been a smile. The ritual began at dusk, beneath the red eye of the ash moon. They chant now. Skin their martyrs. Hollow the soil. Zafira's breath caught. Can it be stopped? Only by blood not yet spilled. Only by fire not yet forged. You must cross the wall, but the wall is sealed. Sealed to those without sin. You are not without sin, Zafira Ashmaal. Silence fell. Then, the oracle leaned close, her breath hot with dying prophecies. You will not return, but your death may feed a future. By the next morning, Zafira's laboratory had been purged of all records. She moved quickly, quietly, through the subterranean web of the Iron Sultanate's forbidden halls. Using dead keys and forgotten sigils, she unlocked the vaults of the war archives and sent ravens bound in iron script to a few trusted souls. She would need a warband. Her first call went to Captain Darvel Nesh, once known as the Grave Butcher, of the 37th Trench Legion, now imprisoned for flaying a superior officer possessed by a sign spirit. She found him in the bleeding cells, chained, laughing through a mouth full of broken teeth. I'll need your axe, Darvul. You'll need more than that, witch. Good. You'll get more than that. Second was Inquisitrix Semira Vorn, an excommunicated heretic hunter who now lived in exile, her hands replaced by searing brands, her face hidden behind a veil of ritual scars. She still wore the nail priest's robe, even though the order had condemned her. She agreed with only one word: when. Third, and most dangerous, was Talthran, a bound demon host. He looked like a man, but beneath the skin stitched from 5 bodies and held by alchemical pins, a predator slept. His eyes, both artificial, twitched with unholy rhythm. His breath fogged the air with whispers. Zafira opened the binding circle. I need a monster. Talthran licked the air. Then, you've come to the right corpse. They met in the shadow of the iron wall, a monolithic expanse of gear, teeth, battlements, and smoking turrets, stretching from poisoned sea to ash-slick mountains. It had not been breached since the heretic siege 5 centuries ago. But that siege had left cracks, one of which Zafira now unearthed beneath a pile of ossified corpses and a forgotten artillery tomb. The team stood ready, Darvul sharpening his trenchblade with ash and spit, Semira murmuring anti-rites beneath her breath, Talthran coiled in his human shell like a viper under warm stone. Zafira stood before the ancient breach, scroll in hand, lantern guttering. There's a ritual beyond this wall, a cabal of flesh priests seeking to open a maw. If they succeed, this world becomes meat for the flame. Darvel grinned. Been too long since I bled something that screamed. Semira nodded. Heresy is the final gate. Talthran only smiled, revealing teeth like broken glass. Zafira took one last breath of air that wasn't tainted by damnation. Then may the iron wall forgive us, because it will not save us. And with that, the warband stepped beyond the threshold, into the land where maps ended and prophecy began. Chapter 2. Through the Wounds of the World. The decommissioned ossuary tunnel beneath the iron wall had no name on any current map. It was a wound stitched over with concrete and denial, long buried under centuries of bones and bureaucratic silence. The passage had once served as a mass grave and munitions artery during the heretic siege, until the heretics found it and filled it with sacrificial corpses and cursed ammunition. After that, it was sealed, entombed beneath memorial shrines, and melted into the myth of a war never truly won. Zafira led her warband through the blackened throat of this long-dead artery, lantern light flickering across walls fused from bone and rust. The scent of desiccated marrow and burnt salt clung to every surface. Ossified skulls jutted from the walls like mournful fungi, their mouths agape in perpetual screams, eyes blackened with centuries of soot. The tunnel floor was uneven, built over stacked rib cages and rusted iron, Their footsteps echoed like hammers on tombstones. Darvul Nesh trudged ahead, his massive form stooped beneath the tunnel's sagging ceiling, trench blade dragging against the wall, with a sound like bone being filed. Samira followed silently, her breath a rasp behind her veil of scars, both hands clutching prayer-etched flintlocks. Talthrin brought up the rear, occasionally caressing the wall with one gloved hand, as though he were listening to the screams buried inside it. "This tunnel is hungry," Talthrin murmured. His eyes, dull and mechanical, twitched in opposite directions. Zafira said nothing. She had begun hearing whispers, not from her comrades, but from the walls themselves. They murmured in the dead dialect of the heretic king, a language she should not have known, and yet she understood every word. They reached the breach, an iron plug the size of a siege tower, rusted to near collapse. Zafira produced a bone key from her satchel, wrapped in gut string and soaked in sacrificial ash. She inserted it into the lock at the center of the plug and whispered the final line of the forbidden scroll. The key screamed. Metal groaned like a god in agony. With a shuddering exhalation, the plug cracked and slid aside, releasing a gust of air that reeked of sulfur, bile, and forgotten sin. The hell-scarred wastes stretched before them. There were no stars beyond the wall. The sky hung like a rotting wound, black-red, veined with pulses of lightning that shimmered through clouds shaped like flayed torsos. The ground was no longer soil but fused flesh and rusted iron, undulating as though alive. Towering spires of calcified bone jutted from the earth at obscene angles, often topped with remains, soldiers crucified upside down, their eyes sewn open and their tongues swollen with rot. Zafira's boots sank into the flesh metal with every step, and her lantern flickered, struggling against the oppressive dark. "This land remembers pain," Samira whispered. "It feeds on it," Darvul spat. "Let it try." They marched in silence. Every few minutes, the wind shifted, carrying distant howls and a faint rhythm like war drums beneath the earth. Once they passed a mechanical tree strung with intestines and corpses in the shape of bells. It rang as they passed, issuing hollow, gurgling notes. Hours passed, or days. Time curled here, twisting around itself like a serpent gnawing its own spine. Eventually, they reached the trench. It was a canyon, carved not by erosion, but by artillery and bodies. Miles wide and twice as deep, it stretched endlessly in both directions, wound into the world by centuries of ceaseless war. The sides were ribbed with bunkers and broken towers, their walls scabbed over with melted flesh and rusted armor. The bottom was choked with the dead, some rotten, some skeletal, some still moving. As they descended into the trench, Zafira realized the corpses were not just dead, they were fighting. Maimed soldiers, wrapped in barbed wire and stitched uniforms, endlessly tore at one another with broken bayonets and toothless mouths. They clawed and gurgled, screaming hymns in wretched harmony. "Blessed be the wound, for through it we see truth. Holy is the trench, for it swallows our doubt. Glorious is the scream, for it silences the unbeliever." Darvul hacked through them without hesitation, his blade a brutal extension of his fury. Samira moved with clinical precision, executing the twitching dead with sacred shot to the skull. Zafira followed closely, reciting warding verses while her gauntlet burned with anti-corruption sigils. Talthrin simply walked through the chaos, untouched. The dead recoiled from him. "They smell what's inside me," he grinned. The deeper they went, the thicker the fog grew, a cloying mist that tasted of burnt memories and left frostbite patterns on their skin. Zafira felt her thoughts slurring, her memories jumbling, names forgotten, faces warped. She gripped the scroll hidden in her robes tighter. They reached the trench's deepest point, where the mud had long since become a graveyard of writhing armor. A barbed wire altar stood there, wrapped in intestines and decorated with helmets filled with fireflies. And beside it, crucified on a spire of glass and bone, was the war angel. Its wings were mangled, feathers replaced with barbed filaments and wires. Its face was obscured by a gas mask fused to flesh, eyes glowing faintly behind cracked lenses. Metallic ichor dripped from its chest, pooling at its feet in a spiral of light. It turned its head toward them. "No further," it rasped. "The wound above will split. The scream beneath will feed." Darvul raised his blade. "Is that a threat?" Zafira stepped forward, transfixed. "It's a warning." The angel's head twitched violently. "The map is cursed, but without it, you die faster." From its ribcage, it vomited a folded scrap of skin etched in bloodlines and war roots. It floated to Zafira's hands. She opened it and gasped. The route to the flesh cathedral was marked. So was something else. A bloodline. Her bloodline. Carved into the map was a sigil she had seen only once, on the inside of her father's iron mask, the one he wore the day he died, trying to burn a forbidden library. It was the seal of the heretic king. The revelation struck like a hammer. Her hands trembled. The prophecy, her compulsion to the scroll, the whispers in the tunnel. She wasn't just an agent sent to stop the ritual. She was its fulcrum. Behind her, Talthrin cocked his head. "You're bleeding, Zafira." End quote. She looked down. The map had cut into her hands. Blood wept from her palms and was being absorbed into the map. Samira took a step back. "What are you?" Zafira looked up, her voice hollow. "I don't know anymore." The war angel groaned, a sound like 1,000 knives dragged through hollow bone. "Redemption lies in the cathedral, or damnation." Then, with a convulsion, it screamed. Wings flaring, body bursting into light and flame. The crucifix cracked. The spire collapsed, and the trench shook with a roar of buried artillery waking from centuries of sleep. Zafira turned to her warband, fire flickering in her eyes. "We move. Now." And so they marched. Deeper into the wastes, the cursed map pulsing in Zafira's bloodied hands, and the hell-scarred world shifting in their wake. Chapter 3. The Flesh Cathedral. The trench widened into a maw. After days of dragging their souls across the cancerous skin of the wastes, Zafira and her warband stood on the edge of the no-god trenches, staring into a pit older than any recorded war. It descended endlessly, a spiral of collapsing bunkers, fused bodies, and rusted siege engines that had long since grown roots in the bleeding mud. The sky above them had turned the color of dried scabs, and the air tasted of copper and slow death. The trench walls wept black ichor. At the very bottom, barely visible through the thick mist of memory-eating fog, stood the Flesh Cathedral. It was no temple built by man. It was groan. Sprawling across the trench floor like a cancerous fungus, the cathedral pulsed with half-living tissue, its towers made from warped femurs and serrated steel, ribs of dead colossi, arcing skyward like broken wings. Veins of brass tubing snaked across its surface, pumping viscous fluid through biomechanical hearts embedded in the walls. The gates were lips, stitched shut with industrial wire and dribbling with hot mucus. From within came a chorus of guttural chanting, language not meant for tongues, words that had no beginning or end. The sound made teeth ache and bones twitch. Zafira felt it in her blood. The ritual was nearing completion. "This is wrong," Samira whispered, voice barely audible behind her scarred veil. "This is impossible." Talthrin smiled with teeth not his own. "It's perfect." They descended. The gates opened at their approach, not with the grandeur of welcome, but the slow, wet stretch of something wounded. The lips peeled back to reveal a corridor lined with weeping eyes and twitching scalp skin, floor slick with amniotic fluids. Every step squelched. Inside, the cathedral pulsed with unholy life. The walls breathed. Stained glass windows made from flayed skin filtered crimson light into ever-shifting patterns of suffering. Iconography of apocalyptic rites adorned the organic architecture, saints with rebar spines, angels crucified on tank barrels, a trinity of heretic kings vomiting fire into the mouths of children. Zafira felt her mind bend under the weight of it all. Symbols rearranged themselves as she looked at them. Her name slithered across the walls in ink made of sorrow. She clutched the scroll tighter, using it as an anchor. The main hall lay ahead, guarded by doors made of kneecaps and welded prayer chains. The butcher priests were within. Darvel muttered, "Let's kill gods." They breached the doors. The nave of the Flesh Cathedral was a grand theater of agony. The ceiling arched impossibly high, veins dangling like banners, each dripping thick globs of glistening serum onto the battlefield below. Along the central aisle, columns made of spine towers pulsed with fetid light. Suspended from meat hooks hung dozens of sacrificial soldiers, still twitching, drained drop by drop of blood, soul, and will. Around a great pit at the center, a congregation of butcher priests chanted in rhythmic spasms. Clad in robes of stitched flesh, each bore the symbols of the heretic cabal carved into their bones. They danced in broken patterns, waving censers that bled fire and screamed. The pit itself was lined with turbines and gnashing gears, powered by soul fuel, the tortured essence of the sacrifices being funneled into an ancient engine of summoning. And in the pit's center, a hellmaw, half-formed, pulsing, rotating like an eye in the void of the world. Zafira's breath caught. She had seen it in visions, in dreams, in blood. She did not hesitate. Now, Samira's guns flared, silver shot ripping through the nearest priest, his body unraveling into wet ribbons. Darvul roared and charged into the fray, cleaving heads from twitching necks, his armor already soaked in the fluids of the damned. Talthran leapt with inhuman speed, his hands becoming claws, his mouth unhinging as he tore into a priest's skull and devoured the memories within. Zafira activated her gauntlet, sending arcs of null fire through the cathedral, burning sigils onto the living floor, searing away the ritual's anchors. But the cathedral fought back. From the walls burst tendrils of sinew and steel, lashing out at the intruders. Flesh-mass guardians pulled themselves from hidden birthing sacs, abominations with no mouths but dozens of eyes, dragging chains of screaming teeth behind them. One slammed into Samira, flinging her across the nave. Another wrapped around Darvul, trying to drag him into the pit. Talthran howled and leapt upon it, tearing through its carapace with both hands. "This place sings my name!" he bellowed, even as his face began to split open from the pressure of so much chaos. Zafira reached the edge of the pit. She saw the summoning circle beneath the maw, glowing with infernal script. She recognized the characters. They were her family's names. Her fingers trembled. "No," she whispered. "This isn't just a summoning. The ritual wasn't only pulling something through, it was resurrecting the heretic king himself, using her blood as the final catalyst. The cathedral hadn't called her here to stop it. It had lured her." Behind her, someone screamed. It was Vorik, one of Darvel's trench veterans. The man staggered back from a shattered statue, clutching his face, eyes burning with unholy fire. "Zafira," he moaned. "Something. It's in me." His skin split, not from pressure, but from within. His spine jerked. His mouth opened wider than it should. Fingers twisted backward. Flesh bubbled, warped, elongated. His eyes became mirrors of flame. The ritual had found a vessel. A lesser demon crawled into his form. Zafira stepped back. "Possession," she hissed. Samira limped forward, loading another shell. "We can still kill him." "No," said Talthran. He advanced, slow and deliberate. "I know this demon. We were siblings in the pit. Before I was bound." The possessed Vorik shrieked, teeth gnashing. The demon had taken root deep, anchored by the very ritual Zafira had come to destroy. Standard exorcism wouldn't work. Zafira turned to Talthran. "Can you rip it out?" Talthran's grin faded. "No, but I can eat it." Then he lunged. What followed was not a fight. It was a consumption. Talthran tackled the writhing creature to the ground, mouth widening until it reached from ear to ear. His fingers burrowed into Vorik's flesh, pulling aside ribs like curtain rods. The demon screamed, not in pain, but in rage, realizing too late that the predator had arrived. Talthran feasted. Steam and ichor rose from the twisted knot of limbs and screams. When it was over, Talthran knelt in a puddle of half-man, half-madness, panting heavily. His eyes glowed. That one tasted of regret. Zafira didn't speak. She couldn't. The summoning pit still pulsed. The maw was still open. But the ritual was weakening. The death of the demon vessel had ruptured one of its anchors. Zafira reached into her satchel, pulled out the scroll, and recited the final counter-incantation in the tongue of her ancestors. The cathedral screamed. The maw writhed violently, its eye dilating, then constricting. Flesh tore itself apart. Bones shattered inward. The priests, those still alive, combusted in waves of soul fire. The summoning collapsed. In the silence that followed, only the slow dripping of ichor remained. Zafira fell to her knees. Darvul limped over, armor shredded. Did we stop it? Zafira stared into the now dead pit. Yes, but we didn't win. We just bought time. Talthrin rose, slick with gore. And now, the flesh cathedral remembers us. They exited through walls that no longer welcomed them. The cathedral slumped, half dead, bleeding out into the trench. But the scars it had left, on their bodies, on their minds, on Zafira's very blood, would never heal. They had delayed the end, but the maw still dreamed. Chapter 4. The maw opens. The air grew heavy, not with smoke or dust, but with something deeper. A spiritual gravity, a pressure on the bones of reality itself. As Zafira and the remnants of her warband emerged from the crumbling bowels of the flesh cathedral, the world had begun to shudder. The trench outside no longer resembled anything natural or man-made. The walls, once steel-reinforced mud and ruin, now pulsed like wet muscle. The sky had torn, ripped down the center like parchment soaked in acid, and from the breach spilled lightless fire, cascading tendrils of uncolor that burned vision itself. Sound had become distorted, muffled as if wrapped in cotton soaked in blood. The trench was no longer a place. It was a wound in existence. At its epicenter, where scorched banners of the heretic cabal fluttered from broken spires of calcified heresy, the ritual reached its crescendo. They saw him standing on a dais, carved from blackened skulls and engine parts, Archdeacon Makir Val, once of the Iron Clerics. Now clad in a patchwork of priest plate and skin robes, crowned with thorns of rebar and haloed in the flame of false divinity. He raised a tome bound in screaming vellum, its pages inscribed in burning bile. Around him, the last surviving butcher priests danced and convulsed, tearing flesh from themselves and feeding it into the soul engine, a cauldron of pure agony that funneled its fuel into the maw gate, suspended in the void above the trench. And the maw beast had begun to stir. It did not emerge like a creature. It unfolded. The sky above shattered with a sound like a cathedral collapsing in slow motion. From the rupture spilled tendrils of brass bone and sinew fire, limbs with no symmetry or restraint. Mouths opened upon mouths, each filled with chattering teeth that hummed dissonant hymns. A single, lidless eye, wide enough to eclipse stars, blinked into being, its iris composed of shrieking faces, spiraling inward. Its flesh was void wrapped in flame. Its scream a sermon delivered in every language, past and future. Zafira dropped to one knee, bile rising in her throat. Even Talthrin flinched, his demonic shell spasming. Darvul bellowed, trying to stand firm, but even his trench-hardened soul was cracking. What in the name of rusting gods is that? Zafira already knew. She who devours light, she whispered. The maw beast, the first hunger, the womb of extinction, and it was being birthed here, through the blood and bone of this trench, through the betrayal of a defector who once swore loyalty to the Iron Creed. Val turned, his face warped, no longer mortal, his features stretched and pierced, eyes replaced with spinning gears of flesh and scripture. He saw Zafira. He smiled. "My blood-born sister," he called, voice echoing unnaturally. "Did you think you could stop what was already written in your veins?" The scroll she carried burned against her chest. The truth of her lineage, the reason the cathedral had not resisted her, the reason her dreams had bled red with prophecy. She was descended from the heretic king, not merely his legacy, but his vessel. The ritual had not been completed because of Val. It had been completed because she had arrived. Zafira clutched her gauntlet, activating its alchemical seals. She reached into her pouch and drew a blade forged of memory steel, inscribed with her true name, the one hidden from even her own tongue, and began scribing a counter-rite into the air. "I can still unmake this," she said. Talthrin hissed, eyes glowing. "You mustn't. That rite, it needs a price. A soul with heretical ancestry. Yours." "I know," she said. Darvul's voice cracked. "There must be another way." "There isn't." Above them, the maw expanded. Chunks of reality were now peeling away from the sky, curling like paper burned from within. Abyssal spawn spilled through. Creatures made of war, nightmares, and divine failure. Tanks with infant faces. Centipedes of scripture. Soldiers who wept blood and vomited fire. Carried on wings made of surgical blades. They poured into the trench, tearing into the terrain, devouring the already dead, reshaping the battlefield into an altar of war. And from the western ridge, distant but growing closer, came the unmistakable thunder of shellfire. The Iron Sultanate's artillery. They were shelling the trench, unaware, or uncaring, that Zafira's warband still lived. High explosive screams tore through the air, battering the walls, turning flesh and machine into splinters. One shell landed just meters from Talthrin, blowing apart a horde of spawn and flaying his left side. He howled, not in pain, but joy. "Yes," he snarled. "Let them burn it all. Let them feed the fire." Zafira ignored the bombardment. She had no time. The glyphs she carved into the air were bleeding light, forming a ring of severance around the maw. It shimmered, resisted, fought her, because it knew what she intended. "You cannot sever a god from birth," Vol warned, stepping closer. "You are the gate. You are the blade. You must choose. Open the maw fully, or shatter yourself and close it forever." Zafira's breath faltered. Her soul twisted within her ribcage, reaching out to the scroll. She could feel it, her ancestor's voice whispering from the ritual, begging her to let the maw be born. It would mean power, a world reforged in divine hunger, an end to weakness, doubt, sin. But she saw the faces of her comrades, Darvul, bleeding, but defiant. Samira, broken-limbed, still dragging herself through the mud to shoot one last heretic. Talthrin, laughing through a mouth filled with the blood of spawn, bound by pacts older than memory. And she saw herself not as the heretic king's heir, but as the woman who had studied forbidden knowledge so no one else would need to. Zafira gritted her teeth. No gods, no hunger, no fate. She drove the memory steel blade into her chest. Not just her heart, but her soul. The ritual required sacrifice. It demanded a heretic's blood, and she gave it all. The glyphs ignited. The scroll dissolved. The air ruptured. The maw screamed, not from triumph, but death. Its great eye exploded inward, devouring itself. Limbs withered. Mouths fused shut. The sky stitched itself closed with bolts of red lightning. The spawn recoiled, howled, and burned, not from fire, but from undoing. Vol shrieked as the soul engine reversed. His body crumbled into scripture and ash. His death echoed with the sound of a prophecy denied. The trench collapsed. The cathedral caved in. The earth howled. And in the silence that followed, only Talthrin stood. He walked to where Zafira's body had fallen. Nothing left but bone, ash, and the faint glimmer of iron scripture. He knelt, picked up her gauntlet, and smiled. "She chose oblivion over destiny," he whispered, "and in doing so, became legend." From the distant ridge, more shells screamed down. The Iron Sultanate, blind and unforgiving, was still purging the wound. Talthrin vanished into the mist, and the maw, for now, remained closed. Chapter 5. Ashes Beyond the Wall. The maw was sealed, but the wound remained. The trench where the ritual had culminated was gone, swallowed into itself by the unmaking force of blood, alchemy, and sacrifice. The flesh cathedral was now nothing more than a crater, slick with black rain and fragments of sacred bone. The air there was still, too still. as if reality itself was holding its breath, unsure whether it had truly survived. From the ridge, the war censers of the Iron Sultanate continued to burn, pouring ash and incense over the battlefield as bombers flew overhead, dropping sanctified steel to sterilize what little life might have crawled out of the hell-born pit. The official report would describe the event as a successful counter-heresy campaign, a divine cleansing conducted by holy battalions. Of Zafira Ashma'al, nothing was written. Her name, like a stain, was scrubbed from the records. Her research was locked behind vaults 3 sanctums deep. The House of Wisdom, in accordance with Decree 111 HR, declared her death an act of apostasy. She was not honored, she was condemned. But she did not die, not entirely. Beneath the House of Wisdom, far below the main vaults and alchemical foundries, deeper than the ossuary catacombs where forbidden knowledge went to rot, there was a chamber few knew existed. There were no guards, only chains. Here, the stone walls bled oil and scripture, and the air carried the silence of the damned. At the center of this chamber stood a monolith, a containment sarcophagus forged from black iron and bolted with glyph-laced bone. No weld held its seams. No lock sealed its door. It was not meant to be opened. It pulsed. Zafira's body, or what remained of it, had been retrieved from the ruins, not by soldiers, but by inquisitors in red-masked armor, moving with the precision of fear and knowledge. They did not mourn. They did not question. They followed orders. Her remains were still warm. Still conscious, they placed her into the sarcophagus, and before sealing it, her eyes, burning with smoldering glyphs, opened. She did not speak. Her mouth had fused shut. Her flesh had grown metal roots. Her blood had become alchemical script. Her soul had fused with the final counter-rite. She had become the lock that held the maw shut. She was the gate, the seal, and the prison. And even sealed, she dreamed. Above her, the Iron Sultanate moved on. The war machine churned through its endless motions. Factories pounding out trench beasts and cannon flesh. Scholars dissecting dead gods for tactical prophecy. The clergy, sensing weakness in the air, grew louder in their sermons. The people burned incense for saints whose bones had long since turned to dust. Every corner of the empire exhaled a prayer, though few still remembered why. The story of the maw became myth again, repackaged into theater, scripture, and training doctrine. They said a brave division of holy legionnaires had uncovered and destroyed a cult of heretic engineers attempting to breach the veil. The truth, that the breach had nearly succeeded, that a maw beast had nearly been born again, that it had taken a heretic-blooded alchemist and a cadre of damned souls to stop it, was left out. Samira Vorn was declared Kia. Darvel Nesh, now missing a leg and half a lung, was sentenced to silence in the salt mines of Harak Fif for operational sedition. Talthrin vanished, of course. No prison could hold him. No record even attempted to. The world continued, but something beneath it shifted. Below the House of Wisdom, in that iron tomb of secrets, Zafira dreamed. She dreamed of fire, of the maw, of the truths buried beneath the texts she once called forbidden. In her dreams, the flesh cathedral still stood, the maw beast still sang. She saw herself walking its halls, no longer Zafira, no longer even woman, something other, something between flesh and word, between vessel and chain. Her bones pulsed with the beat of the maw, her veins burned with the weight of unspent prophecy. She heard whispers, not voices, but the memory of voices, old ones, pre-human, pre-law. They wrapped around her dreams like serpents of lightless thought, hissing prayers into the iron of her cage. We are not gone. We slumber in your marrow. We taste the future in your rust. She screamed, but no sound came. Her voice had been sacrificed. Her soul was not hers. She was no longer guardian nor martyr. She was the tether. Years passed, then decades, and still she pulsed. Beneath the reinforced walls of the House of Wisdom, walls now engraved with new layers of prayer steel, blessed by 100 martyrs and fed daily with incense drawn from saintly bile, there was still that slow, terrible beat. A heartbeat. Not hers. The maw beast had been sealed, but it had left something behind. It breathed through her now. A breath that curled through subterranean vents, that whispered to forgotten relics, that infected the dreams of low-ranking archivists who wandered too close to the forbidden levels. In time, the Sultanate would begin to notice strange things. Infant scholars born with eyes that glowed faintly, statues that wept black sap, scripture that rearranged itself under moonlight. At first, they would call it divine mystery. Then, they would begin to burn again, but it would be too late. Because the maw never left. It only slept, and Zafira, sealed, chained, forgotten, was no longer its enemy. She was its dreamer. And dreams, if fed long enough, always wake. The wall held, but the dream of the beast now breathes in iron blood.